Hello and welcome to the Anomaly Project, the show that looks into all aspects of the paranormal and anomalous world. I'm Marcus Lowth, and joining me as he does every week is the one and only Steve Mera. Now, Steve, this week we're going to be speaking with Nick Kyle. It's going to be a fascinating show. I know you're more than familiar with him. How are you doing? And I bet you're looking forward to this.
I'm always looking forward when Nick talks about anything, to be honest with you. It always fascinates me because he has such a vast amount of information and the work that he's done over the years. Um, it was just absolutely fascinating what areas of research and studies he's kind of been involved in. And it is a bit mind-boggling at times, to be honest with you, but it's absolutely always fascinates me. And I've known Nick for quite some time now, and we've done some work together, and it's always been a pleasure. And anything I did hear about how things had gone at Glastonbury. I had a few friends there, and they were shocked and in awe in the same speech, And I think it's pretty much the same for what happened at Awakenings in May as well. It was a tremendous presentation that Nick and his wife Sarah had done.
Well, yeah, I mean, as you say, I mean, I've heard good things through the grapevine as well. So I think, you know, tonight we're going to be speaking with Nick Kyle, paranormal researcher and investigator, and the creator of The Missing Enigma. So, first of all, Nick, thank you for joining us. And how are you doing?
I'm doing fine, Marcus, and nice to see you again, Steve.
Thank you. Good to see
Okay.
you as well, Nick.
Okay, well, we've got a lot to get stuck into. So, like Steve mentioned, you gave two talks or lectures this year. One at the Glastonbury Symposium, which I believe was run by Andy Thomas, and one at the Awakenings events run by our very own Steve Mera in Oldham. So, I wonder if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about what you spoke about at those conferences. Perhaps start with the Awakenings one, because I'm sure you want to go into detail about both, and that can kind of bring us up to date in the research that you're doing right now.
Yeah, I'm of an age where I can hardly remember what I said. At either conference. Maybe I should pull up my presentation on my screen. Okay, I've been privileged in my life to have a number of experiences, usually in the company of exceptional people, sometimes in unusual or particularly active locations. And I have been investigating ostensible cases of paranormality for approximately 30 years, 35 years, on behalf of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research for much of that time. So what I did at recent conferences was I indicated those cases not based on my personal experience only, because I think that if you have an individual experience and there's no other evidence to back it up, it's merely anecdote. But everything I spoke about could be corroborated. Sometimes by my wife. And what I would say to people is anybody that knows my wife will know that she's more than capable of pointing out if I get it wrong or the date's wrong,
Yes.
or talking rubbish. Thankfully, she's somebody who's also had experiences alongside of me, and I can sometimes corroborate hers. So, for example, here's one experience. I have seen my wife levitate. Now, I mean, I don't need to be a physicist to realize there is something fundamentally anomalous, unusual, to be explained. And it happened during one of the Scole experiments in the late 1990s. I've also been able to attend seances, which are closed door seances for the most part by invitation only, in which I've experienced not only ectoplasmic phenomena, but physical phenomena of various kinds, including partial and full materializations of people. Now, I'm not saying this to your audience in the hope that I will persuade anyone. I'm hoping only that you will accept that this is a corroborated experience. So I could be a high-performing crazy, but not if other people are in full agreement. And these experiences are so beyond the norm that I think they deserve to be called paranormal, although some people say it's normal for the people who experience it. And certainly I've experienced a lot over the years. I don't feel the need to write about it or do very much, but I did make a promise many years ago that if I was given unequivocal evidence, I would spend the rest of my life telling anyone who had an interest, warts and all, not just the nice things that make me look or sound good, but everything, the full story, so that people can go away and do their own reflections and investigations. This is perhaps tangential, but stop me, Steve or Marcus, if it's not for your audience.
Oh, you go.
I went to Ontario several years ago and met a social group of Ontario paranormal investigators. And it was like a campfire type barbecue in someone's big garden. And everyone was meant to contribute something to the discussion. It may be an anecdote, it may be a song, a poem or something. And I contributed a question. Now, this is something I would like your audience to reflect on as I'm telling the story. I said, if I gave you a small post-it to write upon, and I said that you should write based on your personal experience of the paranormal, not something that you read in a book or saw on telly or heard someone say, but round the campfire, there were over 2 centuries of experience, if you totaled it up. I said, so what has it taught you? And the quality of the information has to be such that if this was being written on your deathbed, you would be happy to have your children act upon it. Now, I thought that was a perfectly reasonable question. And immediately one man went to answer, and his wife stopped him and said, hold on a minute, you saw that on television. Nick's asking for what have you discovered as a result of your own efforts? And he went quiet. And another man went to answer, and his wife said, darling, you read that in a book, and we have talked about it, but it ain't your work, it's someone else's. And he went quiet. There was a bit of discussion around the campfire, but eventually they moved on, and I didn't get the answer I was looking for. But 6 years later, I went back to the same social event, the same Ontario paranormal investigators, and some of the people present around that campfire remembered me from 6 years previously. And they pointed and says, there's that troublesome guy from Scotland who asked that question, and we've been arguing about it ever since. And the guy said, I've got your answer. And I said, that's really good. And what is it? And I reminded the new members of the group, something that you've achieved as a result of your own efforts, not secondhand from someone else, that you would write on your deathbed, secure and confident in the knowledge that this was something that you could act upon. And that this man said to me, it's all about love. Everything. All creation, all material, the whole world, inside and out, it's about love. And I said, yeah, that's a really good answer. It's actually better than mine, I think. I said, what I decided I would write to my children is simpler, but not better. There is more to life than can be touched or measured. Go find it, because I know it exists. And that's a message that I would give to anyone. Take all the ghostly haunting experiences, all the entities, all the spectacular stuff, the stuff that television would be fascinated by, and many people would almost find impossible to believe, but they happen. What does it mean is the real question, not what happened. I think in the world of paranormality, we've moved beyond what can happen. And we're now into So what's the significance, the meaning of it? What can we act upon that will enhance our understanding? And that's where I'm at, I would say. So when I speak to your audience about any of these individual experiences, corroborated as they are, I have no wish to make them sound more impressive or better. And I'm not going to disguise things that I'm unhappy about. There were a couple of aspects of the Scole experiments that I thought, frankly, were disappointing. And I have spoken about them, and I will do tonight if you wish. But
feel free, yeah, feel free.
That doesn't compare to the stunning phenomena. I've been in and around spiritualist circles and seances for 20 odd years. The Scole experiments were on another level. You actually felt as if you were maybe not even in that location because so much was happening. And the good news is, well, the bad news, if you want the good news and the bad news first, I spent 10 years trying to replicate the phenomena with very limited success, almost no success. And it disappointed people and it frustrated people, and people who'd been friends wanted to go and do their own thing because it wasn't working. The Scole guidelines didn't work. And Robin Foy confirmed with me that after years of, after the Scole experiment stopped, there wasn't a single group anywhere in the world that had attended his sessions, and we're still getting reliable phenomena, repeated phenomena. And then he said to me, except two people from Scotland, and you know them because they were in your home circle. And it turned out to be mediums that were in my home circle who had left after years of trying to follow the Scole guidelines. They did their own version, if you like, their own practice. And I can tell you their names, Tom and Linda Anderson. And the category of phenomena, the spectacular nature, the impactful experiences were on a similar level. And outside of spiritualism, I've gone to haunted houses in cases. One was called the most demonic haunting in America, but I don't think it was. I think it was a haunting. Right? No need to bring demons into it. Right? People are people, no matter whether they have a physical body here on earth or they're in the next world, and they have both good and bad intentions. In fact, one of the things that Steve and I have discussed in the past is that when you go to the spirit world or the afterlife, people don't seem to lose their sense of humor.
No, that's right.
So they play tricks on you and they say things, and the trickster mentality is something I think that's been noted by several commentators. But I'm blethering now, Marcus. So just
no. I mean, I want to get Steve's thoughts on this in a minute, but can I just ask you quickly two quick questions? Because it relates to what you've just said. Firstly, why do you think Tom and Linda Anderson had the success they had when they went off on their own? Okay. And secondly, with the ghosts there, and you're saying, when you move to spirit, you maintain your sense of humor. Does that not suggest then that essentially ghosts are representations of people, literally of the person that once lived?
Deceased persons continue to live or exist in a non-physical form for the most part, although they can reincarnate physically on occasions or materialize, as we call it. Analysing what happened with Tom and Linda Anderson is in itself interesting, quite separate from the Scole experiments. But what was happening was, in a darkened seance room in Glasgow and other locations in and around Glasgow, we would meet in blacked-out conditions. You couldn't see in front of you. And this was designed to help us to see very faint illuminated spirit energies. And it worked in as much as we did see some flashes and the odd orb and so on. And of course, and I'm embarrassed to say this, but hey, this is my punishment to tell the world how I got it wrong. I kept saying, did you see that orb? Yeah, I saw it. But it was nothing like the 20 orbs at Scole Or there was a flash of light there, and I sensed a touch. Did anybody else see the flash of light? Did anyone experience touch? And I would say, well, yeah, I got one touch, and I saw a flash of light just over your head. But hey, in school, we would shake hands, and we would hug, and we would objects would materialize and dematerialize, and sometimes the orbs would go inside our bodies, and I could hold them in my hands and so. So what was happening was, over months of small steps, I was norm referencing them to school, and they got fed up, and they said, Nick, we want to remain friends with you, but everything that excites us, you keep putting it down because you keep referring to, I know how great it can be, and this isn't it yet. So they went their separate ways as far as spiritualist circles went. And I began to hear reports, some of which were on the internet from them, that they were having fantastic phenomena along the lines of what I'd experienced at Scole, but widening outside of the seance room to other aspects of the buildings or of their homes, and a wider range of communications. So I contacted them and said, Robin Foy's told me that you brought through the whole spirit team he'd been working with for 3, 4, 5 years, and you brought them through physically so they were able to interact with them and touch them and hug them and kiss them and so on. And Robin was overcome with emotion because he thought that these were like members of his family he would never meet again. And Tom and Linda Anderson were physical mediums, and they brought them through. I said, what's going on? And they said, well, we're embarrassed, Nick, because it was you that told us about Scole, and it was you that led the experiments to try and replicate it. But we've managed to find a way to bring spirit through just as powerful. And it involves emotion. Now, I don't know what your understanding is, Marcus, of emotion, but a behaviorist would say it's a pre-programmed response to an environmental factor or stimulus, perhaps from another person, but not necessarily. And I don't like that behaviorist notion because it strips it right down to who likes to think that the person they fell in love with was just a pre-programmed biological psychosocial response. It's nothing to do with you or your free will or whatever. I don't, They said emotion is about trust and respect and belonging and committing and loving and liking and so on. That's what fosters the relationship. And it was like somebody dropped a penny. You don't form human relationships by saying, I don't really believe a word that comes out your mouth, and I want to strip search you to make sure you're not trying to dupe me, and I will test you everything you say because I can't really trust it. You form relationships by committing to positive regard and cooperation and collaboration, never conflict, and maybe the spark is there for a loving relationship. Well, Tom and Linda Anderson had that relationship with Spirit, and they brought me into their seance room, and Spirit welcomed me with open arms physically. I was grabbed by the arm and told to sit down, and a child came up, and I can go into details if you like, but I had more than half a dozen experiences. And not all of them needed darkness. I've been to restaurants in Glasgow. The tables have slid around and nobody's touching them. And someone of my acquaintance expressed some doubt because he felt that maybe I was too good at telling a story. So he came along, and sure enough, the table slid around for him too. I don't know whether you want to comment on that, Steve.
Absolutely, that gentleman was me. I mean, I was very keen. I mean, what I can say is that we were in an environment what was nothing to do with Tom and Linda. Of course, it was a restaurant, and we'd met there, myself and my partner Jackie, and of course Nick and Sarah and Tom and Linda. Now, I was sat actually opposite. I shared a table with Sarah. Sarah was sat opposite me, and then to my left was Jackie sat opposite Nick, and then on a separate table were Tom and Linda at the end. And it was all very uplifting, and it was all quite fun, and we were all heightened emotion. It was interesting enough because we were all kind of having a good laugh and a giggle and stuff. But there was this element of the science side gets hold of you, and you kind of say, "Look, I need to ask some questions in the sense of interviewing. I need to get some clarity as to what's going on here to make some type of judgment on the authenticity of the claims." And I reached down to my bag and I brought up a pad and pen and stuff, and I asked if it was okay for me to ask some questions. They said, "Yeah, no problem." And I was just kind of to the point of putting pen to paper when suddenly the table jumped. And I don't know why, but I immediately looked over at Sarah, and Sarah just went, "It's not, I didn't do that." And it did it again. And I looked under the table because there was nothing touching the legs. Then it was a relatively higher table than your knees as well, so you can't be lifted or things like that. And I could see this shunting. And then of course some of the cutlery where Nicky's started to move, and I saw a few things twitching along on my side of the table, and I just thought I didn't know what to say, to be honest with you. I was a bit taken back, but it was all fun and enjoyable. And I just turned around and said, "Well, end of interview," and I just put my things back because what else can I say at that point apart from this isn't a seance sitting. It's just and this is the first time I'd met Tom and Linda, and there was no prepping. It was just totally unexpected and out of the blue. And I'm thinking to myself, considering what Nick had told me and the capabilities of these people and what they experienced, is that I am just sat in a restaurant without any effort of communicating with spirit, without any control mechanisms, without any protocol, or without any just random, and it's happening in front of me as I'm there, and that's without that greater effort. And I completely understand the fact that, yes, for me, I can say I have no doubt at all that if they applied effort to this, then some of those things would be tremendous what they'd experienced. And it was an experience for me, certainly. And it was very interesting. I enjoyed it.
And it also happened in the same restaurant with a mutual friend of ours. I'll keep his name out of it because I didn't ask him in advance to be able to talk about him. But he had a very similar enlightening experience, which he'd not ever had before. But I went to a Glasgow tea room, if you like, a restaurant, but it specialised in tea and maybe coffee. And we were at a large table that would sit easily 6 people, probably 8. And it was quite heavy, I think, in its construction. And it suddenly, it rose up by at least a foot, maybe 18 inches to 2 feet. All I know is that table down at hand level went up to here. Wow. And it didn't move. There was no wobbling, there was no jumping. So I put my arms on top of it and tried to force it down. And it was as if I was the featherweight because it didn't move at all. And then I took my hands away and it very, very slowly came down. Diners started to leave. People were calling for the waitress. Can you come in? What's happening here? And I just turned and smiled and said, "It's the Glasgow subway. The vibrations are..." And they knew that wasn't an answer, and they knew I was making a bit of a joke out of it. But Tom and Linda were in hysterics because they said, "There you go, president of the Scottish Society for Psychical Research, and your jaw has dropped, and you're unable to do anything." Can I just add a little amusing bit to this story?
Yeah, of course.
So we went to another place, a well-known cafe in Byers Road, and we sat down. And the reason I chose that was because everything was screwed to the floor. There was no sense in which chairs, it was all bench seating, tables screwed, everything was fixed. And as we sat there, and Tom and Linda were giggling because of why I'd chosen this place.
Yeah.
A 4.5 to 5 foot high ice cream cone floated in the front door. Now, I thought I was going to take a heart attack. You know, it's like, this is a brightly lit cafe, it's buzzing with people, and I've just seen an ice cream cone float in the front door. And then struggling underneath it was a tiny little assistant, a young girl, and I hadn't seen her because the cone was so big. So that gave me another laugh. Sometimes you think you're seeing phenomena when there is an explanation, but that was the only occurrence. And I think it's only fair to say that Tom and Linda's love for each other and the happiness and the giggly nature of things, I can say hand on heart, every seance starts with laughter.
Well, that actually leads me into another question, actually, Nick. Why do you think they had such success? I mean, you mentioned that, you know, they saw a connection between love and emotion. I mean, one thing I do know is that stressful situations, and I suppose the other way around, overly happy situations, can kind of act as conduits to paranormal activity and paranormal encounters. But I know also that spiritualists will say this is something that you can learn. You can learn. It doesn't necessarily have to be down to something that somebody's gifted with. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is it something that can be learned? Do you feel it's something that is a gift to you, or have you learned this? Same for people like Tom and Linda. I mean, what are your thoughts?
I've been asked this lots of times over the years, and I've developed an answer which I'll use with you, Marcus.
Okay.
Marcus, can you run?
Can I run? Barely at times, but yes.
Well, if you can run, why aren't you competing in the Olympics?
Because I'm not that good at it, and I think I know where you're going.
So there's maybe a genetic natural talent for sport and for mediumship, but a lot of it is to do with repeated attempts to improve. And relationship building is a skill that can be learned, but some people do it naturally. And I think Dan Siegel, a well-known American psychiatrist, wrote a book which had a big impact on me because he suggested that how many senses do you have, Marcus? 5?
You should say 5, I'm guessing, but
okay. We'll add one on. We'll call it ESP, the size sense, and that would make 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
He postulates that there are at least 9.
Okay.
And it's interior signaling, which some people might call intuition or a gut instinct or a hunch. And it's about what you do with your mind when you're trying to sense these phenomena, expand your conscious awareness to do through mental activities such as meditation, which I teach, and also interconnectivity. By connecting, for example, with nature or with other people, you can build an energy which appears to be conducive. But my wife, when she heard this eminent psychiatrist say that there was, I think it was 8, 9, he said, she said, what about the 10? And I said, what do you mean? She said, there's another sense he's missed. And I said, I knew you were a wise woman, but you got to tell me, what's the sense that he's missed? She said, common sense.
Right.
Okay. So I would suggest that we listen again to the inaugural speech that Nelson Mandela did in South Africa when he came out of prison after, my wife says, 27 years. I thought it was slightly less. And he'd been reflecting pretty much on his own for most of that time on what's life all about. And he came out, and I'll tell you the words. They weren't originally his. They were from an American poet, Marianne Williamson, I think. And this is what he said to the emerging nation of South Africa. Our greatest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our greatest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. Now he goes on to explain how to develop that. But just think for a moment, Marcus. I will bet you a month's salary you were not brought up by an education system, by a society, possibly even by your parents and religion, to believe that you are powerful beyond measure. It doesn't fit societal norms. It's a threat to the powers that be for individuals to feel empowered and enabled like that. Now, please don't think I'm being egotistical. I'm a very poor representative of that philosophy. I was a slow learner at school and I was a late developer. But I can say to you that self-regard, self-care, and self-values are key contributors for special things to happen.
I mean, I want to get your thoughts on this, Steve. But I want to say, Nick, listening to you speak there, it's like you're taking thoughts out of my mind. Basically, it really resonates with what you're saying. And like you said about you're not brought up to realize that you're powerful. That's the kind of thing that I came to realize through researching the paranormal. As silly as that sounds, so I think that's absolutely fantastic. But Steve, I mean, come back to training. Well, what you must, I would imagine you agree quite wholeheartedly with a lot of that, essentially.
Well, absolutely, I do. Yes, I think it is intriguing though when Nick said when he was explaining that when he first kind of got involved with Tom and Linda after experiencing stuff at Skull, and I can completely understand this, is that you kind of your expectation levels are and what you've witnessed is really up here. I've fallen foul to this myself a few times because you get the great stories of this, that, and this that's going to happen, or it's wonderful, and then you get there and you get little sparks of things, and I'm I'm kind of sort of okay, sort of thing. But it's very easy to fall into that situation, I suppose. And it's if I'm going out and talking to people, and Nick will know this, of course, when it's something that's very personal to them if they're having paranormal disturbances. Something that we might consider is, well, it's very, it's very low frequency, very low severity. To them, it's a mountain. So it's a matter of showing that, that and going along with the process of that, not undermining the fact that we might consider this to be very next to nothing, but it's massive for them. But I get that mindset because I've been there and it's very difficult. I mean, we have to also consider those little bits of flashing lights or the odd prod might have actually been the start of Skull. It might have come from that, and they may have been at that level for a year. I know they were at this for a few years before it actually got out to the general public. The reason being is because apparently the spirit team had said to them that there was a chosen time to do so. And then it got to the stage of, well, okay, let's invite, people. But I think you had to get to a certain level for that to happen. But if you've already experienced it at that level, you're kind of thinking you want to jump straight back into the frying pan. But I think there's this mechanism, a process, a build. It's very difficult to sort of maintain the excitement and stuff if you've experienced this level of stuff. And it's not normal. I mean, well, I say it's not normal. It is paranormal, of course, but but it's not known throughout the world of this intensity. The Skull is a pinnacle place, a pinnacle experiment. There's nothing ever been achieved as far as I'm aware of like it. There has been some things, I mean, some areas that focus more in NHI communications, some are focused in other areas, but nothing like Skull, which was kind of a complete package deal. And as far as I'm aware, people have tried to achieve the same thing, but might get little bits or spin-offs and things. And it's the same with numerous other experiments, but never actually achieved it. But I think it's something where it is easily to fall foul to, especially if you've witnessed the most incredible things in your life, and then you're sat in a room looking at little flashes of light, and you're putting effort in, but it's difficult. I mean, maybe there is this emotional drive. I remember when I've been in the States and visited a number of churches, and these churches are for communities that, it's not the churches like we go to. They sing and praise and jump up and dance, and I tell you what, I don't know if you've ever been to one of them, Nick, but honestly, have you been? It really does grab your soul, those places. And I tell you, you have to battle yourself not to join. This energy, whatever this is, this community of shared consciousness and emotion is got to be a trigger somehow responsible for the assistance of these things to happen. And it's that is the problem, because we all talk about these energies, but nobody can really put the finger, science can't put the finger on it. We say spirit energy, we say all these different things about energy, but it's a difficult one to sort of grab hold of, because scientists are saying, well, what energy are you referring to? Is it magnetic? Is it radiation? Is it gamma? Is it? Well, I don't think there's any of that. I think it's something that is just fundamentally part of the process, but we can't readily identify that through scientific means.
Yeah, I mean,
Marcus, is your audience and your following, are they interested in phenomena or spiritualist phenomena, psychic phenomena? Because I do have one or two impactful experiences well away from the seance room, which I don't know if it suits your audience, but it's paranormal.
I would no, definitely, because a lot of the drive behind the Anomaly project is absolute connections between all different aspects of the paranormal and beyond that. So yeah, please tell us, because that would be fascinating.
Yeah, approximately 12 years ago, I woke up at 3:30 in the morning with a male voice speaking in my right ear, and I can assure you there was no man in my bed at that point, just my wife. And he woke me up and said, we want you to go to Sao Paulo. And I didn't know whether Sao Paulo was a town, city, region, country, whatever. I had to Google it, right? And I said, okay. I said, if things happen spontaneously and I think they're from spirit, I will do my damnedest to fulfill them. Okay, why do you want me to go to Sao Paulo? Not knowing where it was. And he said, because there are things that we want to teach you there, and it's more difficult in Scotland. So I went in the next day to my job. I was a deputy head at a secondary school, and I asked about a retirement package and found I had just missed the deadline for applying. So I can put it out my mind and thought no more of it, really. An air of disappointment hung over me for a while, because this was something that I know had come from a spirit voice, and I had was basically ignoring it. Exactly a year later, I think to the very date in November, the same voice woke me up about 3:30 in the morning and said, thought you were going to Sao Paulo. As if, he'd waited a year to say that, but for him, it was just... And I said, well, I did try. And there was a pause. He said, so are you going or not? He said, well, it means resigning my job. And he said, yes. I said, and that's what you want me to do? Okay. So I wrote a letter of resignation, walked into my boss, said, a year ago, I asked about an early retirement package. Is it available to me now? And he basically said no. So I handed my letter of resignation. And I was discussing this with a physics professor friend of mine, who Steve knows slightly. And he said, so what are you going to do? I said, now that I'm out and unemployed, yeah, I'm going to use some of my pension. I'm going to go to Sao Paulo, because I found out it's in Brazil. And he said, well, I'd like to go to Brazil. Can I come with you? Sounds like a spiritual adventure. And I said, well, yeah, but to make it more adventurous, let's go to Machu Picchu and I'll do an ayahuasca ceremony and see what happens, because I've been impressed by some writers' experiences of that, including Graham Hancock.
Yeah.
And he said, well, I want to go to Rio because, Copacabana Beach and so on. And some of your audience might not know that Christ the Redeemer, big, enormous statue that looks over Rio, has a chapel in the heels of Jesus. That was not supernatural, maybe, but it took me by surprise. Anyway, yes, we did the ayahuasca thing with the chief guardian of Machu Picchu. We went to Rio and had a normal tourist type holiday. And then we arrived around midnight in Sao Paulo. And the following morning at breakfast, Barry was sitting quite excitedly saying, okay, I've got the maps, I've got the train timetables, I've got the bus routes, where are we going? And I said, I don't know. I said, no. you'll have a name, a contact, an organization, an address. I said, no. He said, well, have you not done any research? I said, why would I need to do research? I've been asked to come here by spirit, I've come. They're not going to let me down now. And he found this very challenging because he had spent the same amount of money as me, and you just assumed that there was a reason for coming. So he said, but literally what we're going to do? I said, we'll go a walk. Now, we walked in a meandering straight line because we didn't know where we were going for 40 minutes. And the first building I stopped outside of was a fairly mediocre or ordinary looking 12-story office block. But what caught my eye was the word esprit on the wall. And I figured it was a sportswear manufacturer or maybe a travel agency or something. So I opened the door and stepped inside and knew immediately I was in the right place. There was a bronze bust of Allan Kardec, the founder of Brazilian Spiritism, on the right-hand side. And the receptionist said to me in Portuguese, can I help you? And I said in very bad Portuguese and a little English, my name's Nick, I'm from Scotland, and Spirit have sent me here, but I really don't know why. And she burst out laughing. And I thought, oh, she thinks I'm a nutcase. And she snapped her fingers for a man to come over, and I thought that she's calling security. I'm going to get thrown out here in front of my pal Barry, and I'll never live it down. And the man came up and said, welcome, Nick. Spirit told us 2 weeks ago you'd set out on your journey here. You're most welcome because you've walked into the largest spiritual healing hospital on the planet.
Wow.
12-story building, 1 story was a car park, 11 stories were for patients and spiritual healers, and they did everything, working in tandem, I think, with medical staff in the normal sense of the word. Now,
who do you think was that told you to go there? Just out of interest?
Yeah, it was someone that I've come to call my guide. His name would be Bartholomew. Right. But at that time, I just knew it to be a familiar male voice, but I didn't know much about him. Now, I spent a week and a half watching, listening, struggling with the language difficulty, even though I was given my own personal interpreter by the hospital, I call it. And she was a lovely lady. And in one occasion, the patient was sitting in a chair with a healer on the left, a healer on the right, and healer behind, and they were holding their hands up, and they were closing their eyes, and they were whispering to I don't know, the patient, each other, spirit, I don't know. And a man sitting beside me, I think he was sent to keep an eye on me, said, what do you see in it? I said, I see 3 people trying to heal somebody. And he went, anything else? I said, well, yeah, the lady on the right shouldn't be doing it because her own health isn't too good and she's not a good channel for the energy that's necessary. But I commend her for trying. And he said, she's a clerical admin worker with no experience of this. We put her in as a test. Take her place, please. So I took the place of that healer and immediately felt a surge of energy go through me. So when I hear people talk about anchoring heaven on earth, I can relate to the feeling, maybe not the philosophy. And I then understood that there is this particular method of healing, and I've been trying to do it ever since, always free of charge and always successful. Now, let me clarify that, because there'll be people sitting there saying, oh, really? You think that healing can cure cancer and so on. No, but healing and the intention always seems to have a positive impact, make a positive difference. And sometimes the condition is much improved. I've had cancer patients that expected to live for 3 months have lived for 4.5 years. And I don't attribute any of that to me. I attribute it to what the ritual and the technique enables. I attribute it to this thing that we call spirit. But that brings me to another point, Marcus. I was sitting in a restaurant in Sao Paulo, and Spirit stopped me as I was eating my food and said, "Go and talk to the woman who's just sat down outside." So I put my knife and fork down, and I stood up, and my friend Barry said, where are you going? I said, "I've just been told by a voice to go outside and speak to a woman who's just sat down." And he leaned, and from his vantage point, he said, "Yeah, there's an Oriental type girl just sat down." And I said, "Oh, right, okay, so I'm away." He said, "You've not finished your food." So I went out and sat down on the bench and said to the girl in English, "Is it all right if I sit here?" And she said in a very cultivated English accent, "Of course." I said, "Oh, you speak English?" I said, "I thought I was going to have to practice very poor Portuguese." And she said, "No." I said, "Where did you learn such a good accent? It's better than mine. I'm Scottish." And she laughed and she said, "I went to Cambridge to study English because I'm an actress and I am a singer as well. And I was told I would succeed in America if I could improve my English accent." She said, "But tourists don't normally come here. Why are you here?" And I said, "Oh, it's a big story." I said, "But I felt impressed to come here to learn about healing." And she said, "Well, maybe I can help you with that because I'm a medium and a healer, and I know what's happening both here in Sao Paulo and back in your country in the UK. What would you like to know?" What are the chances, Marcus?
Mm.
You know, it's almost as if I'm being guided step by step. And remember what I said about I'm a slow learner. They need to take me by the hand and push people right in front of me for me to respond.
Why do you think that is, Nick? Why do you think they want you to learn whatever they want you to learn? Why do you think they're guiding you? Why you, essentially, I suppose, without being blunt? Have you had any thoughts on that?
I haven't had many thoughts as to why me, but my answer typically would be why not.
Yeah. Fair play. Yeah.
I have met people. Let me give you an example, Marcus. The most impressive medium of the last century or so might arguably be a Mr. Albert Best from Scotland. He was known as a healer first and as a medium second, but he did tours to Australia and Africa and across the world in a time when that was not known. And I'll tell you this quickly, but I'm happy to tell you as many stories as you want. Albert knew that I was a skeptical researcher, and he said, "Would you like to see me heal?" And I said, "I'd love to see you heal." So we went to his little tenement flat, and there were roughly half a dozen people there. And a woman pushed a young man in a wheelchair. And she said, "My son's being diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor behind his eyes. He's already suffering and he's not expected to get better." I think she was struggling to get the words out to say he's dying.
Mm.
And this is what happened. And I will swear on oath that this is exactly what happened. This uneducated Irish postman, who was Albert Best, closed his eyes, sat down, and began to speak in fluent German, stood up, stroked the boy's forehead once with his fingers, and I saw a dark globular mass come away in his fingers. He shook it into a basin of water, still with his eyes shut, sat back down, and after maybe a minute and a half or 2 minutes, opened them and said, "What happened?" I wasn't impressed by that. I've seen psychic surgeons at work. He didn't have any conjuring type tricks to hide up his sleeves because he didn't have sleeves. He was wearing a short sleeve shirt like me. And I wasn't impressed by this, what happened, because it's so easy to act that. I'll tell you what impressed me. I kept in touch with the mother, and 3 weeks later, I said, "What's the update?" And she said, "Oh, we got an apology." I said, "An apology?" Thinking of Albert. And she said, "Oh no, from a child's oncologist." He said he can't explain it, except he must have mixed up my son's scans with another patient, because not only does he not have a brain tumor, there's no sign that he ever had one. That impressed me. And that's not a singularity. That's not a rogue anomaly. That is happening in lots of different ways to different people. And it's miraculous, Marcus. I think I've been privileged to meet people, not just Steve Mera, who's got an encyclopedic knowledge of active investigations and paranormality. I've been privileged to meet people who can perform miracles in front of their eyes. And if you haven't met people like that, Marcus, all I can say to you is go find it, because it exists.
Yeah, I can imagine it is. I mean, we were speaking to another chap about this kind of thing, and I'm not sure if you're a religious person, Nick. I mean, I'm not particularly, but I do believe in the message of the Bible. But what I was saying is, if these type of things were happening in the ancient world, these people would be seen as divine. And, so you can argue whether Jesus existed for real or not. But if he did, whatever he might have been called, and he was doing this type of stuff, you would think, well, he's obviously in communication with something from the spirit world or some kind of. So it just kind of blows my mind, because, what people say, oh, if the Bible's real, then how come all this stuff isn't happening today? Well, it kind of is happening today. It's just kind of buried under all the noise of modern life.
What I'd like to do is to shake your audience a little bit, just to look outside of the box. Is it possible you can conduct a healing and the person dies as a result? So let me give you two quick examples.
Okay.
I was asked to attend a man who was dying in the hospice, and his two daughters said to me, yeah, we hear you're a healer. Can you come and heal our father? And I said, yes. No hesitation, yes. Because Spirit had brought them to me. And that was the promise that I had made years ago. And I said, but just be aware that if I visit him, he may pass quicker. And that was not what they expected. I could almost see them recoil. And I said, they said, how does that work? I said, if I give him energy or act as a channel for that energy, and he is suffering, he may decide to use the energy to pass. And that's what happened a few days later. Now, the link to Albert is that he was asked to go in and save the life of a child in a Glasgow hospital. And he went into the room, private room, family all round about. They're all looking pleadingly at him. He scooped the child up. He put his hand on the child, and he heard his Arab guide say, "You're too late, Albert. The call has already gone out for this one. The best you can do is ease the child's passing." And as he put the child back into the cot, he looked at the family, and he was overcome with their emotion, being an empathic kind of guy. He couldn't even articulate the fact that he'd just been told this. So he went outside in the hospital grounds outside the ward. At those days, you could still smoke outside the ward. And he was smoking, and I think he was quite agitated by the grief of the family, or the apprehension anyway. And he didn't tell me, when he was telling me this story, he didn't say how many minutes had passed, but he was still smoking when he heard the name, "Where's Mr. Best? Where did he leave? Is he around?" And he ran along the corridor back into the room, same family, same child, same situation. He scooped the child up in his arms, and the child took one breath and died. And Albert put the child back in the cot. And he turned to the family and said, "How did you know exactly when to call me?" And they said, "We didn't." The child, the baby's face, turned to that of a wizened, brown-faced old man, and he spoke in a gruff male voice and said, "Tell Mr. Best to come, and quickly." Now, years later, when Albert was poorly, he suffered from diabetes, and that was one of the things that killed him. I visited him in hospital, and there was a young man, in the ordinary sense of the word, standing by the bed, and Albert said, "When you two leave, you should talk to each other." And I said, "I'll happily talk to anyone who's a friend of yours, Albert, but is there a reason?" He said, "Yeah, I know how skeptical you are, and I've told you a story, and then you're always wanting corroboration." He said, "Why don't you talk when you leave?" And when I left, I said to the young man, "What was Albert referring to?" And he said, "Did he tell you about coming to this hospital and trying to save a baby and not managing to. And I told him the story, just as I've told you, maybe in a little more detail. And this young man turned and said to me, every word you've been told is true. And the reason I know is because it was my young brother that died, and I was standing watching, and I saw the face change, and I heard the gruff voice, and he was a baby.
Absolutely fascinating. Steve, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, it's absolutely fascinating.
It's incredible,
stuff.
isn't it?
I mean,
you know,
as grim as it is, but
it is, and it's what seems to be the situation is that there are two sides to every coin, should we say? But these things don't get heard very often, and I don't think people realise the amount of interaction that we can participate in regarding positive things and assisting. I think it's a lost knowledge that people don't even attempt to try and understand. But there are obviously places around the world that are doing these sort of things, and I do hear about certain things, and I do find them incredible. But then there's only so many times you can say, well, it's a one-hit wonder, isn't there, really? I mean, it's just, and you really do the research, you find, no, this is not a one-hit wonder. These things are going on all over the world. And if we could just use as a general thought to be able to utilize these actions, the world would be a better place. But it seems like, it's gone beyond the tipping point a little bit. Everything seems very negative, and people are drawn away from the natural spiritual understanding that we might have with the things around us. It's very analytical, very scientific. I think that's not helped. Though that science does want questions and answers, and I tried their very best. But the unfortunate thing is, I think even the process of investigation by science doesn't help the process of experiencing the phenomena. I mean, I don't get Nick's views on this, but do you think it's a bit more of a deterrent, a limitation, Nick, the scientific rigorous approach to try and understand this subject?
Well, I'm pleased that Professor Chris Rowe, Northampton University, is trying to overcome the relationship building issues that have existed, where a scientist basically, and think how they've treated physical mediums in the past. They want to do intimate searches, and they want to sweep the immediate environment for any sense that there could be props there for hoaxing. And then they take all sorts of recordings, and nobody would try and build a relationship based on that kind of approach. So Chris, I think, is trying to work much more creatively with mediums, and there's an ongoing study at the moment. But just in this idea of breaking out of a box of thinking we understand this, my guide for my sporadic mediumship is called Bartholomew. And the BBC journalist who actually attended my home circle for a while asked for permission to do a historical investigation, and found that Bartholomew did not exist in the time and place that he said. So the following week, Bartholomew comes around into the circle, and the guy's sitting there, and I'm sitting there, and I'm in a mild trance, and I said, "Oi, what happened? You gave us all this names, and first names, second names, your wife, your names of your children, the name of the college, the years you worked there, the fact that you were a new breed of industrial lecturer." And I said, "What happened? Because this guy here looked into it, and you weren't there." And Bartholomew turned and said he was looking in the wrong place. I thought that was an unacceptable answer, because I knew how good this guy was at his job. And the only reason I'm not naming him is because I didn't get permission. I didn't ask for permission before this, but I'm sure he would. Bartholomew then said, "What's more important, the message or the messenger?" And I said, "Oh, the message, because you can build upon that. I've known plenty of messengers, but It's me that's got to try and develop. And you know, he said, exactly. So move on. Now, I still think that's an unsatisfactory answer, but I'm being honest. That's what happened. I'm beginning to think Bartholomew may not be an external deceased person who's volunteered to be my lifetime guide. I think he may be part of me. I think that there are a number of selves in this unitary sense of self that we have, and they emerge in different times and different places for different purposes. We all know that we put on a front at work that we don't maybe have at home or amongst friends and so on. And these selves may, in some cases, be that deeper subconscious aspect of us that has spiritual leanings and finds it difficult to communicate with the conscious mind. So only does it in what I call abruptions, you know, where it just happens spontaneously.
I mean, it's really interesting, Nick, that you say that, because I mean, I'm obsessed and I'm convinced that the human mind is one of the key things to understanding the paranormal. I mean, I bang on about this all the time. So for you to say that again, it fascinates me. But I mean, so essentially, well, what we're saying is that it's almost like a robberous or the you know the time the loop time theories where everything's happening all the time at once. You know, it's time isn't linear and that kind of thing. So, what are your thoughts on that? You know, like you say, do we have different personalities from different dimensions that are locked away in our subconscious mind that are guiding us? And also, I'd like to get your thoughts on is how important do you think frequency is? And the reason I mention that is you were on about healing and stuff of that nature. There's plenty of research to suggest that, you know, frequencies were very important in the ancient world and better understood than we understand them today. Do you think that frequencies are important? I mean, I know Tesla used to harp on about that a lot as well. So I know there's two questions there, but what are your thoughts on those two things?
Okay. When I once discussed frequency with my physics professor friend Barry, and I was using the term energy in connection with spirit communication, he leaned forward and said, great, now you're beginning to talk my language. What is the nature of the energy? And give me the specific frequency that enables certain things to happen. He said, because I know a lot about this stuff. And of course, I wasn't able to give him a precise frequency. There were a whole range of them, and the claims that were out there didn't always harmonize. So I didn't really know. And then when I spoke about energy, I had to lapse into some kind of pseudoscience where I said, well, love's an energy, but, you know, have you got a machine to measure that? And of course, it's not a satisfactory answer, really. I'll be honest and say I work with frequencies that I don't really understand. I have a frequency machine. I listen to through headphones to different frequencies and binaural beats and so on. And I've been doing it for a number of years, and I know that they have an effect. But okay, here's my problem. This is where I turn off some of your audience, okay? I think there's an awful lot of rubbish spoken out there.
Yeah.
And the only way that you can distinguish the rubbish from the genuine is through evidence. And it's either personal corroborated evidence, which I think is the best kind, or it's something that's maybe suitable for skeptical scientists just to annoy them, because it's hardly likely to persuade them. I've known scientists to say, because I don't believe it can exist, it doesn't matter how good your study is. So that's why I was
so unscientific and to start with, really, you know.
And of course, science is basically a belief system, although an extremely successful and impactful one. But the beliefs can interfere. Here's the second thing that I'll say that I hope doesn't offend people, but it has in the past. There is so much egotism out there.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So people will say, oh, I know about this and I know that I can do that. So I haven't found any spiritual healers that are willing to work with patients that I can't work with. I haven't managed to. Right, they seem to just vanish, as we say in Scotland, like snow off a dike. And I'm talking about religious healers. My father was a pastor, and I said to him, if Jesus was anything, he was a healer, and he told his disciples to go and heal in his name, and they would have greater power. And I said, how many churches are in Scotland? It was 400 or something. I said, how many regularly practice healing with results? He said, maybe 3 or 4. And I said, so what's Christianity all about if it's abandoned the key mission? I said, because I can't find any bloody ministers or priests to come and heal in the name of Christ. A young man a few miles away who has 3 to 5 epileptic fits a day and who's unable to compose a sentence of language, and he gets looked after 24/7 by 2 full-time carers. I don't see anyone waiting to help him. And I don't feel able to, which is another frustration for me. But to go back to ego, it's rife within the mediumship world. And even amongst investigators, they want to outdo each other. And I just don't like to get involved in that kind of competition. So I get tired of listening to people say things without evidence. And I'm not talking about evidence that has to be quantifiable, empirical, statistically significant research. I'd be quite happy to have something that you can apply reason to. And perhaps in the way that you would in a courtroom, but of course I don't want to be legalistic. Just something you can work with. Now, Steve Mera is somebody that I admire for his capacity to look at something that's apparently unknown and to come up with hypotheses, and he follows them up, and he sometimes gets studies and analysis and results that are helpful. And not everything has to be tied to his laboratory. Control conditions are something that can be debated over.
Yes.
But I mean, to try and think that miraculous can only happen in a lab. Let me tell you, Marcus, when I die, and I almost did a few months ago, when I die, I'm going to come back and haunt the parapsychology labs in the planet, and I'm going to trash them when there's nobody in the room, but the cameras will capture what's happening.
At least we'll get that evidence that we're all after. So, I mean...
And you can sue me afterwards.
Fascinating. It really is.
Yeah. I mean, Steve, like you say, it is fascinating. What are your thoughts?
Well, it is. I mean, it's a journey that we can only hope to put a tiniest dent in a lifetime. Be honest with you. I mean, I think we've still got to, I don't think we're learning something new. I think we're just scrambling to find out something old, that we've lost touch with. Seemingly ancient ancestors, there's evidence to support that they were highly more attuned than we were, because these, the things that they did, things where they built, they knew about certain energies, geological energies, certainly, all sorts of different things. But I think we maybe lost our way to some degree. And of course, now this new human, Homo sapien number 2, we're gathering as much as we can to learn something old. But it's difficult because we've got everything pushing against us now. The way the technology is moving, the way that our minds are working now is so much right-sided. We're losing creativity. Now we've got AI and we've got all these things, and it's just taking us further and further away from our true selves. I think it's a problem. And Nick asked me a few, some weeks ago, and when we talked, and he said, about the world as it currently is, and I said, well, I don't think it's a good, the tipping scale is not in a good direction, and I don't see how we can get out of this rut, because we are individuals that we can't do much about the society change, the way the world is going. But it does seem that maybe we may have to have an intervention of some sort to get us back on track, because there are many people know that internally that there is something and want to try and reach out for it. But it's just life is just battering against it and pushing it back. So I can see that. I can understand that it's going to be troublesome, I think, ahead. And I don't know where the future of this subject is going to lie, to be honest with you. It does worry me a little, to be honest.
Well, that actually leads me nicely into, I mean, we'll obviously start wrapping this up in over the next 20 minutes or so. But I mean, Nick, I mean, again, going back to the human mind a little bit, I suppose, and you mentioned it yourself about, like we were talking about running, and if you ran every day, then you would obviously improve, etc., etc. What are your thoughts on, I don't want to bring alien abduction into this or anything, but just to use that as an example, people who think or claim they've undergone such experiences, and it can even be experiences with ghosts and poltergeists to a lesser degree, they often come away and feel that their mind has opened up slightly. They feel more in tune with nature. They feel more in tune in general with other things. Do you feel that the more you experience the paranormal, the more you research, investigate the paranormal, the more you even around people who maybe are conduits for the paranormal? Do you feel that that opens up the mind to see things that just possibly they couldn't see before? Almost like more of the human spectrum, if you like, beyond the veil, that kind of thing.
The most impactful experiences that I've had that are corroborated, ignoring all the stuff that's only happened to me when I'm on my own. These are the things that make me want to understand more. I'm not a phenomena junkie. I've had more than enough phenomena to satisfy me. There's just a little bit of me would like to better understand it. But here's a negative thing. Tom and Linda Anderson have stopped their mediumship.
Okay.
And Tom, whom I knew to be a healer, and I think Linda too, Tom doesn't want to be called a healer because he's had people attack his character and threaten to sue him in court and so on, just for claiming to be able to heal. And of course, Tom says, but I don't claim it. These are the people who have given me the testimonials. I don't solicit them. And that wasn't good enough. And he eventually said, Nick, not only am I not doing it because it's dangerous, I don't want you to be in the position where you might endanger yourself. He said, so I'm going to step back. Call me a holistic health practitioner if you must. He said, an energy worker. He said, but that's it. I'm stepping back from physical mediumship. Albert Best himself said, I'm retired and I'm not going to do any more criminal cases because if the Glasgow underworld hear that I can name them.
Yeah, yeah.
He said, I wouldn't be giving too many more messages, I can assure you.
Mm.
And I've had a kind of experience where I've wondered whether this is really good for me to boldly go where other people fear to tread and to encounter negative entities. I mean, I don't know, Marcus, whether you want to hear some of the worst cases or most impressive cases.
Oh, yeah, I mean,
you can't do this kind of work for a long time and not be affected.
Yeah, I can completely imagine. I mean, Steve, I'm sure we'd love to hear some of those because we're quite obsessed with the dark side of this as well. Obsessed, the wrong word, but certainly willing to be aware and embrace that dark side instead of just ignoring it. So
when I do when I do training for paranormal investigators, using a lot of the material that Steve donated to me a number of years ago. I do have a cautionary word of warning. I say to them, you might find the subject fascinating, but do you really want to go beyond reading and hearing about it? Do you really want to encounter it face to face? I said, I'm fearless. I'm autistic. I'm a little mad, maybe. Background in martial arts makes you think you'll have a go at anybody or anything, even if it's non-physical. And yet, other people, I think, particularly people who have mental health issues, should steer away from the whole mediumship, psychic, and investigative thing until they bring a bit of stability and good sense. And I'll give you an example. If you walk about with your senses wide open, you're going to pick up a lot of bad stuff. The late Professor Archie Roy, the person who founded the Scottish SPR, once compared it to using an Ouija board. He said, when he was asked, does it work? He said, oh, yes. And how does it work? He said, well, it works in two ways, he said, that I know of. It works at a subconscious level of the mind. He said, but it also works because it opens up a doorway or a pathway for spirit to come in. He said, so think of it like open your front door. And this, I'm mentioning this because some of your audience might relate to this. Open your front door and invite as many people as you like into your house and have a party. Now, you might have a great time and make new friends and feel, wow, that was successful. But what if some of the guests don't want to leave? And unlike a day-to-day ordinary sense of a party, you can't call the cops. You can't grab a hold of them, but they've got a hold of you. And I've experienced that when I went to a case of a mum with a young child. She had bought the home she lived in as a child herself and found that the same ghost that she played with and sometimes tormented her when she was a girl was still there now that she was a mum herself. And she brought workmen in to do renovations before Christmas, and the workmen left the job because of more than one instance where there were spirit children laughing, calling out, stealing their tools, hiding the tools in different rooms they'd not been in, and so on. Eventually, they walked off, and she called me in, and I was aware right away of a male entity, and I identified them by name. And I said, come on, is it you that's doing all of this stuff? And he burst out laughing. He said, yeah. He said, I annoyed her when she was a kid herself. What's she complaining about? He said, she bought the house. I've stayed here. It's not me that's the problem. She brought it on herself. And he wouldn't really leave her alone. So I said, okay. She's aware of the trouble you're causing because of the workmen and so on, and because of phenomena. I said, but I can hear you. I said, and I can talk to you, and I can hear your reply. Why don't you come home with me? You're much more fun. Better communication. My wife might even be able to see you because she's clairvoyant. And he went, okay. And you walked down the drive of the house, got into the back seat of my car, came to my house and stayed for a fortnight. And I regret doing that. I know why I did it, because as someone who's committed to working with children throughout my life, it's the most heart-rending experience to know that you can't protect your child from an invisible assailant that you can't lay hands on. So he was a dark, depressive, unhappy, earthbound spirit. And it took me several hours of concentrated effort and Bartholomew, if you remember the spirit, to get him to leave. And I can say he has left. There was another case. I think your readers, your audience might find this interesting because there were multiple hauntings in one house. There was if you like, a 3-4-story house. There was the basement level, there was the entry level, and there was the bedroom upstairs level, and then there was an attic. A man phoned me up and said, Nick, what do you do when your family's under attack and we're all sleeping in the one room? He said, in my upbringing, my job is not just to provide for the family, but protect them. How do you protect against evil entities who are attacking? I was there the next day. In fact, I think I went that evening, and with a couple of investigators. And one of the first things I noticed was that the basement, they'd started refurbing the basement, knocking down walls, concrete dust everywhere, exposed brickwork, and laundry just thrown on the floor. And there was a man standing in spirit, quite distinguished looking man. And I said, "Is it you that's trashing the basement?" He looked at me and he said, "Me?" And then he got angry and he said, "You? Have you seen the state of the place? They're trashing it. They're knocking down walls and they're not, you know." And he went into a rant. And when he eventually finished, he finished with the words, "I would never have allowed this to happen when I was in charge here." And this was the servants' quarters.
Right.
And I said, "You'll be the doctor then that used your front reception room as a consulting practice, a surgery." And he just looked at me. And I said, "And you signed the Hippocratic Oath, didn't you? And dedicated yourself to helping people. What's changed, friend? I still see you as the caliber of a man who cares about people. So let the family live in peace, even if you disapprove of what used to be your house." And he turned and walked out a first floor window. And in 6 years, he'd never returned. In fact, it's more than 6 years now. Never returned. The attic at the very top of the house, where children were laughing and things were getting thrown around. There was no real damage being done. It was just annoying to hear people in your loft and think maybe intruders and so on. So I went up and in my sternest voice, which I'll not do here because you're all about the place laughing, I said, "Stop it and leave now." And that's exactly what happened. I was quite surprised. Children in my career didn't always do that, but hey, I must still have learned something.
Can I just ask you quickly, Nick? Do you think if anyone went up there and did that, it'd work? Or do you think it's because of your experience in dealing with this kind of stuff?
I can sense the energy. I can tell when someone's there. I can sometimes hear them. You seldom see them, although I have done. And I'm clairsentient. I feel the energy in my body, in my bones, and that can be a good thing. But for this case, the worst haunting aspect was what was happening in the bedroom. 3 adult girls. One was a graduate, 2 were undergraduates. The graduate didn't believe in any of this woo-woo stuff and shut her door at night and barricaded herself in and said, "You're all going mad, I'm having nothing to do with it." And she never had any phenomena attack or disturb her, which there's something in that. There's a truth there.
Yeah.
She just locked it out and it seemed to work for her. But the other 2 daughters, one in particular, I remember her as being a bright, attractive, and vivacious young woman, but she used to get attacked in her bed at night. Now, initially, it wasn't too bad. It was the bedclothes being pulled off with duvet and so on, and then it would be inappropriate touching. She was worried as to what was going to happen next. And sometimes when she left the bedroom, it would be trashed when she comes back. And she pointed to some really heavy pieces of furniture that I would struggle to lift that had been toppled over and so on. And the parent confirmed that once or twice this happened when there was no one at home. So that bothered me. But the story about the worst aspect was when the girl said to her sister, "I'm worried about going to sleep tonight because things are building up." And the sister said, "Don't worry about it. I'll sleep beside you on the floor, and I'll be there, and I'll try and protect you. We'll work on it together." And her sister lay beside her and on the floor beside the bed. During the night, the sister, who felt fearful, was lifted by her ankles into the air. The other sister jumped up and pinned her sister's head and shoulders to the pillow while the rest of her body was pointing, up at an angle. And they both screamed, and the parents come running in. And the central hanging light bulb with the lampshade on it was jerkily pointing to each corner of the room. Now, if you had hit this and then called your parents in, it would start to swing, wouldn't it? Because it's in one wire. And the parents confirmed that it was not swinging or swirling, it was pointing energetically, not even in sequence. That's when they phoned me. And that male entity was a right nasty character. And it took 3 investigators 3 visits to clear the case, mainly because of him. When I was interviewing the mother, she sat bolt upright and rose from her chair, claiming to have been grabbed behind by the neck. And I saw that with my own eyes. And I thought either she's an Oscar-winning actress or I'm actually having the interview disrupted because this entity is furious with the parents for telling me the story. A TV channel wanted a case that had quite a lot of evidence, but wasn't in the public domain because it never been published. And I contacted the family and said, look, I'm not asking for this. I'm not going to make money from it, but you might. And they turned the TV company down because they wanted to expose, if you like, their identities to the community. And I agreed with that decision. But the reason I mention it is because this was 6 or 7 years after these events. And the man said, I'll tell you why we're even considering it now. You had 3 people coming to your home 3 times. You never charged us a penny. You never asked for any money. You said it would be confidential. In 6 or 7 years, I've never heard anybody talk to me about something they've heard from me. And he said, we've not had a single occurrence of ghostly phenomena since the day you left. And I wouldn't have believed it myself, he said, except I'm living there and it's now a happy family home. Does it get any better than that, Marcus? And I've said this to Steve so often, you'll be bored hearing it. I don't know why I can stop phenomena. I genuinely don't know. I walk through the door and it collapses, or spirit are there to talk to me and I manage to persuade them to leave. I think it's partly attitude, but it's also energy. I can interact. And I can talk the hind legs off a donkey. That's why there's a donkey sanctuary locally. Right? I don't want to go on and on. Maybe you want to direct my thoughts with some questions.
Well, I mean, Steve, first of all, what are your thoughts on what Nick's just been saying there? Because, it's just fascinating, mind-blowing stuff, really, that, is...
Yeah, I don't know if... I don't know if homes can be cleared. I know that there's plenty of mediums out there that claim that they can rid what is in a home. Most of the things you see on television or we read or we hear is, oh yes, we've done a great job and there's nothing happens now and your house is clear. But you don't tend to see them going back 3 months later and talking to Mrs. Brown and saying, oh, how's things been? I think in some cases, I think if you can converse with these things and get them to try and understand the situation, then it's a matter of assisting them to be able to leave, as opposed from I can force to get rid of you. I don't know if that can happen. I don't know. A lot of people talk about that. They can wield the power and rid a home of spirit phenomena. But Nick's explained it perfectly tonight, it's like a cohesion of trying to get them to understand and maybe ease them out the door and they may see better of it and sense. I don't think it's a great thing to say, look, come back with me. I know a few people that do that. And yes, they do tend to go back with them, but it's not always a good situation. I know somebody does that on a regular basis, but you know what? It's just some people are like that. I don't agree with that. No, it's not something I would suggest a good thing to do. But then, there are people that have these problems and disturbances. You tend to see periodic things, or if you follow this long enough, there tends to be little patterns of events when they take place, or certain times at the bikes of stuff. Nick mentioned also about renovations, alterations. people have done cases where things have seemed to have settled down, and we gave him a letter. It's like it's not a warning letter, but it's an advisory letter about, don't go straight into the home, start wrecking the walls down and things, because you might get a spot, and you forget. It's just kind of everything's fine for 6 months. Let's go and knock that kitchen wall down, and then they're on the phone to me because it's seemingly the phenomena's returned just as it where it left off. So I guess geological, environmental changes, his energy's all in our homes and environmental ways, isn't they? If we start knocking down walls, we're changing the upset in a home, and not just in a spiritual sense that somebody may have lived there before and they don't like it, but I think that environmental readings, meters, geological and environmental readings, you can change through alteration in properties, and I think that sometimes can. I think I don't fully understand, but I think we have to kind of gel with. I have what Nick think about. I think it's more of a kind of understanding and trying to assist rather than forcing your hand here.
I would interject to say this is from a man who has also gone into various locations that are haunted and got the phenomena to slacken and cease. And I wonder how he explains his own impact.
Absolutely. I know exactly what you mean, Nick.
And I'm aware of a case, and I think I know what Steve's going to say, but I'm going to ask him. I'm aware of a case, more than one case, where you clear a property in any sense of the way you want to describe it, and the person who lives there brings the phenomena back, brings the entities back, the spirit that they said they wanted to be rid of, they invite it back, almost like moths to a flame. And would Steve agree that a lot of good work can be outdone by people like that?
Absolutely. And one of the biggest problems that we're having nowadays is the acceptance and the interest to the subject. I mean, we have people contact me regularly, families, people which are having problems. But because of the fascination and because of that interest, they just can't let it go. And I just keep saying, look, just let it go. Let it go. And it just won't let it go. And so I said, look, I can't help you if you're not going to happy. It's okay, you want to be interested, but when things start getting a bit iffy for you, it's because you're dabbling with it, and so, I've got to make a decision, and some people are responsible for the whole family of having problems. So yeah, it is problematic. Nick is absolutely right. Some people just, they get a bit, oh, well, it's someone gone a bit quiet now and the limelight's gone and this, that, and the other. And this happens in many cases. It happened in the Enfield poltergeist case. It's understandable. Suddenly got all these fascinating people around, and and it's all interesting and lots of things happening. It's like Christmas every day, and then all of a sudden, things go a bit flat. They're kind of thinking, I miss it a little bit. So. It's problematic at times, and Nick's right. There are people. It's a people problem. Most of this is not many paranormal problems. To be honest, it's people problems. Same shaking his head. Yes.
I've got a couple of examples, Marcus, of psychic or mediumistic skills that are impressive. Would you like to hear a quick one?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Nick.
I'm just aware of the time for yourself, and I don't want to waste your time. Okay, so Steve knows this story, and he knows the medium involved. It concerns an up-and-coming young medium called Dominic Bogue from the west of Scotland. He does a couple of American tours each year, and he's a clairaudient medium, partly because he's registered blind. Now, I was very interested in Dominic's story, and I helped to draft his book. But as part of that, I said I wanted to test his abilities, and I offered him a challenge. I would give him 2 envelopes, and under observation, I would ask him to comment on the contents. That's it. And then I thought, that's a nearly possible task. I'll help him a little bit. So I took 2 envelopes and I put in one a letter and in the other a photograph. And I put them in front of him, so I knew he had no idea what was in the envelopes in any ordinary sense of the word. And this is how I tried to help him. I said, one envelope contains a letter and the other contains a photograph. These may or may not be related. But you should be able to tell me, you're the psychic, you're the medium. And can I say how he responded? And this is exactly how he responded. The letter writer is a woman. She's a mother. She's lost her son. Her son is in the center of a group photograph in the other envelope. And she is really, really upset. She's grieving. And he went on to make 75 statements that were very detailed. And he never met the person who provided the letter, that wrote the letter. He never met her. Still hasn't to this day. But I met the letter writer in a restaurant a week or 2 later, and she came all the way up from England to hear what had happened with her letter, because she sent a letter to me asking for help. Her son was had addiction and substance misuse, and he had left the mother, and she thought with his habit he might have killed himself, and that would explain why he hadn't been in touch for many months, maybe years. So I knew the story, but I didn't share that with anyone. And my wife and I sat down in a restaurant, and this woman was with her boyfriend at the time. And we went through the 75 statements, and we asked her to say yes, no, or I don't know. She said yes 59 times. 59 times over envelopes that Dominic didn't even touch. He just put his hands out over them. And she actually said yes 58 times. And on the next statement, she said, no, that's wrong. And I said, well, we'll mark it wrong. I said, but I remember I was speaking with Dominic, and I remember he was quite definite about this one. But hey, we'll mark it wrong. The woman burst into tears and left the restaurant. So Sarah followed her out and said, what's wrong? And she said, Dominic said that I had lost a child when it was very young. She said, that is correct, but nobody knows that, not even my family. How the hell can a stranger in Scotland that I've never met know that? And I didn't want my boyfriend to know that either. So that's where he went from 58 correct statements to 59. Now, that works out. 59 statements out of 75, I think it was. It works out at a 75% success rate.
Oh, yeah.
Michael Jordan didn't achieve much better than that, although he was supposed to be the greatest basketball player ever lived. The Americans have a fascination for doing the stats, and I think he only managed about 80% of the baskets that he aimed for. And yet he's praised and lauded to the highest levels.
Yeah,
Dominic's report, it was unpublished until he put it.
It's a fair point. It's absolutely fascinating, like you say. And I bet this kind of thing's happening with multiple other people all around the planet. It's like you say, we just don't necessarily get to hear about them. I mean, Nick, we're gonna have to kind of wrap this up because we're kind of pushing over that 90-minute mark. But I mean, which I don't want to do because this is fascinating. But I wonder if you just want to let us know, what have you got coming up? What have you got coming up in the next few months? Have we got anything, any more conferences you're attending, any more talks that you're giving? The floor's yours, basically, for the next 30 seconds, Nick.
The Scottish SPR is going through change.
Okay.
When it was founded in 1987, there were only 60 commercial websites on the planet. And now there are millions and billions of users. So the old lecture society concept where you would trek up to Glasgow and sit in a lecture theatre for a couple of hours is no longer a model that's appealing, where people can sit at home and press a button and get the lecture online. So I've been asked to help shape the society's response to this new internet-based world, and at the same time improve the quality and ethical kind of considerations in the work that we do, particularly with investigations. And Steve has contributed to that in the past. So that's one major task for me, which will last a while. I host an online group, which is fascinating, but I'm not allowed to talk about it, except to say attendance or membership is by invitation only. And some of the people who attend know things that I didn't know, and they're not in the public domain either. They want to speak in total confidentiality, which I'll respect. So there's another night of the week. I've joined a discussion group recently myself, which discusses very simple concepts. But of course, if you get people together for an hour or two, even a simple concept can be opened up like an onion, and you realize there's layers upon layers of situational awareness and so on. And I really enjoy that. So I'm going to commit to sticking with that. And apart from that, I get currently 1 or 2 cases a month and 1 or 2 healing clients, which I don't even like the word client. Everything I do for free because I've been given the opportunity to do it. Albert Best, who was visited by stars of stage and screen, I'm not even sure if I can tell you who has visited from Hollywood. Maybe Tina Turner would be one name, but there are lots more. He came to a little tenement flat in Glasgow. He's seen royalty. He's seen been consulted by heads of government. And I know that because one of them came to my home because Albert was supposed to be having dinner and I invited the person. And again, Albert said, don't talk about these things, Nick. He said, because I'm not interested in fame or money. He said, it's the distress that brought the person to me that I want to focus on. And that's still my attitude. He was a good mentor for that. As far as speaking, I've got a conference and a meeting of a historical society to speak to. And I do get invitations, mainly from people that have seen me speak. So I've got, just from the recent conference that Steve organised in Manchester, I got some cases and some people that want to correspond about things. And it happened again at Glastonbury just recently. I think I might give in and write a book, but it would only be to stop me having to repeat myself, Marcus.
That's fair enough. Steve, I'm sure you agree. It's been a fascinating 90+ minutes. It's been absolutely really mind-blowing.
Being in the company of Mr. Carl is always a fascinating night.
It has actually. I mean, Nick, look, it's been fascinating. We'll have to have you back on here because I feel like we've left so much on the table, to be honest. I mean, I've only got, 90 so minutes to get it in there. So I would love you to come back on down the line. It's been fascinating speaking to you. So thank you very much for taking the time out of your day. You're obviously a busy man. Been absolutely fantastic, Nick. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick.
It's enjoyable to meet you, Marcus, and it's always enjoyable to spend time in Steve's company.
Okay, and also thank you guys for joining us. As always, make sure that you subscribe to our channel. Make sure you check out the Anomaly Project Podcast.com for articles and information. Until next time, though, goodbye and take care.